Hey everyone, it's Nate from Soul Friend Astrology, and I'm really glad that you're joining me for today's video. As you can tell, I'm at my parents' house with this lovely 3-year-old portrait of me on the wall overshadowing us. And I think it's actually really appropriate that I'm at my parents' house to record this video because we are in the middle of Mercury Retrograde mania, right? We are in the middle of our 3-week season of having to go back and retread and revisit old ground and places that we've been before to renew and refresh our relationships with those things represented by Mercury in our chart. And for me, Mercury happens to represent my parents. Mercury also for me represents my 5th house, so creativity, which is actually really appropriate because this is like the 3rd take of this video that I've recorded because the first 2 were unusable thanks to audio problems. And Mercury also for me represents the 8th house of death, right? So in an interesting turn of events, this whole Mercury retrograde cycle for me has been really literal in some ways because this past weekend, I actually drove with my husband and our dog to a small city in central Southern Virginia for a family funeral. My grandma passed away a couple of weeks ago, and so her funeral was this past Saturday, right? So 8th house, death, 4th house, ancestors, right? So we've got this tie-in right there happening and manifesting in a literal way. And what I neglected to mention in my video last week is that Mercury stationed retrograde in a square to the planet Neptune. Now, in traditional astrology, we don't typically work with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but they're there and they are influences that we pay attention to. So for this Mercury retrograde, since there is such a tight square to Neptune at Mercury's station degree, it almost imports some of that Neptunian seasick dissolution quality to this particular Mercury retrograde. And what was really interesting is that on Friday, as Mercury is stationing, my husband and I decide to take this back road because it seems like a more direct route from the interstate to our destination. And that was the biggest mistake that we have made in quite a long time because we were taking US 58, and if any of you know that road, it is really windy and perilous. And that whole region of the state had just had an ice storm, so there was still like an inch of ice on the trees. Now, they had gotten the road salted and they had gotten all the downed limbs off to the side, but it was quite a perilous trip through the Piedmont, and we all ended up getting car sick and needed to just stop and walk around and get some fresh air, which is interesting considering that Neptune sometimes imports a seasick quality into the things that he touches, right? So hopefully for you, this Mercury retrograde is not off to such a literal beginning, but I think it is really funny the way that these things make themselves manifest in surprising ways. So as we're looking ahead to this week, the very first thing that we're starting with is a Mars-Jupiter square. Right? Mars has just entered Pisces, Jupiter has just entered Sagittarius. And since this is a slower transit because it involves 2 superior planets, that means 2 planets that are farther up in the Chaldean order from the sun, right? That means this is a longer transit. It's a little bit longer than, say, like a Venus-Mars square or a Venus-Jupiter square because Venus typically moves faster than Mars and Jupiter. But here, since this is a longer transit, we're going to be feeling this a little bit longer. So it perfects today, and I'm recording this video on Monday the 19th in Eastern Time. It'll be released on Tuesday the 22nd. But this theme, this Mars-Jupiter square theme, will be active for the better part of the week. So keep that in mind. Now, how do we interpret this Mars-Jupiter square? Essentially, it's about the conflict between ideals and desires, or values and what it is that you want. I don't want to moralize, and I don't want to draw a distinction between Mars as being like base desires and Jupiter as being higher ideals, but this transit really is about the conflict between what it is that you want and what it is that you believe is most important. what your matters of ultimate concern are. So sometimes those things work in harmony, right? Sometimes what we deeply, deeply desire, or what we feel like we want to go after, is in alignment with what it is that we believe is most important about life, about the universe, about everything, about the number 42. But sometimes those things are in conflict, and because this is a square, it's not necessarily going to be an overt head-to-head conflict, but it is going to be kind of like these two things are at cross purposes. Like our ideals are putting the brakes on our desires, or rather our desires are putting the brakes on our ideals. So it's harder for us to pursue one without neglecting the other, it might feel like this week. So in an overcoming square, the planet that is in the superior position, in this case Jupiter, has a little bit more to say about how this manifests. So if we are indeed encountering this tension between ideals and desires this week, we may find that we end up siding more with our ideals rather than our desires. Now, that does not mean that what it is that we desire is necessarily bad, but it might not be the right choice for us. And I think with this Jupiter having a little bit more power and Mars being able to access some of Jupiter's resources because he's in Jupiter's sign, I feel like the tension for many of us will resolve in kind of a beautiful way, that maybe we might not get what it is that we want, but we won't be disappointed with the results. To give you an example of how this might look, say, especially because we've got Black Friday happening this week in the United States, which is a huge shopping day for those who are unfamiliar, we may decide that instead of completely blowing our bank accounts on getting everything that we want in order to give to people to prove to them that we love them or that we care about them, we might instead decide that this year, I'm going to give people the gift of my presence. I want to make connections with people. I want to make them feel valued and make them feel desired. And maybe I want to do that in a way that more comports with the importance of presence versus presents with a bow on them. Right? The next thing we've got happening as well, and we've got two wonderful things happening on the United States Thanksgiving holiday, which is Thursday the 22nd here in the States. We've got the sun entering Sagittarius, and we also have my parents' dog screaming in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. And we also have the full moon in Gemini. So immediately when the moon enters Gemini, we'll have this perfected full moon happen. It's actually really right after midnight Eastern on Friday, but for most of the United States, it'll actually be very late in the evening on Thanksgiving itself. And that's going to highlight the Sagittarius-Gemini axis, as well as the sun's entrance into Sagittarius, beginning Sagittarius season. So there's a lot that we can say about this, but I'll try to keep it brief. Sagittarius season is holiday season in the West, and it's something that we all have to deal with every year, right? But the holiday season, for all of its glitter, for all of its holly jollies that it brings with it, for all of its family and togetherness and joy and hope and peace and love that it can bring, we have to remember that the holiday season is not necessarily a good thing for many among us, and many among us for whom the holiday season is not necessarily a constructive time of year, whether it's because they have crummy relationships with family, whether it's because they have some triggering religious baggage that they are confronted with every year around this time, whether it's because they have food or clothing or financial insecurity, or whether it's because they have seasonal affective disorder and this makes it a really hard time for them. A lot of times people don't feel safe to say that, actually this is really not a good time for me and I need some help. Sometimes people are grieving during this time. I mean, my family's grieving right now. So perhaps the tension between Sagittarius and Gemini can encourage us to be a little bit more exacting about how we are approaching this holiday season. The other thing too is that we have immediately upon the sun's entrance into Sagittarius, we do have the Sun Jupiter Cazimi, which I had already spoken of in the Jupiter and Sagittarius video. But as I'm thinking about it now, I realize, I wonder if this might be an energy that purifies some of our ideals, some of our big, beautiful beliefs a little bit, or the way we approach things like a holiday season, right? Because if we're approaching a holiday season from a position of accumulation of almost like too much Jupiter, right? Or if we are approaching a holiday season that really just glosses over some of the ugly or hard parts about the holiday season for a lot of us, how is that really constructive? How is that living into the full ideals represented by Jupiter when he's in his dignity, right? So perhaps this Sun coming into perfect conjunction with Jupiter will cause some of us to reflect on and reevaluate our ideals about the holiday season and how we approach things like the people in need around us. And I know that's a common trope that gets bandied about this time of year. I think it's especially important to remember in this year because, as it said, to those to whom much is given, much will be required of them, much will be asked of them. And I think that those of us who are really living into this huge Jupiter energy right now, with Jupiter and Sagittarius, that's the best place to be humanitarian from, right? Sagittarius, the front half of it is a humane sign. It's associated with service to others. It's associated with passing on our own abundance to others who are in need. So that may be something that comes to the fore for us, especially this year as we're considering our priorities, and especially as we're considering the political climate that we're in right now here in the United States in particular, where there is so much opposition and so much violence. This is really not the time to circle our wagons and focus on what it is that we want and what it is that we need. Rather, Jupiter and the Sun are going to ask us to say, hey, what have you been given and how can you reach across lines of difference to share that with other people? Whether those lines of difference are religious lines of difference or ideological lines of difference, or whether those lines of difference are the kind of lines that I drew out where people who are having a rough time with this part of the year really just need a helping hand, or really just need to be seen and witnessed and have a little bit of light and life shared with them as well, because we've got it in spades right now, and I think that's really an appropriate way to use those gifts. The last thing coming up that we need to keep in mind is early next week we've got a Mercury-Mars square, and this Mercury-Mars square, Mercury again is in Sagittarius and retrograde, so Mercury is in the superior position here, but Mars is over in Pisces. And whereas the Jupiter-Mars square was about the conflict between ideals and desires, the Mercury-Mars square with Mercury retrograde and overseen by this Neptune thing is going to be about confusion of desire. What is it that you want? And so sometimes when we are confused about what it is that we want, it's really hard for us to go after things in constructive ways. And we sometimes may chase after things that we think, oh, well, maybe I just need to try this. Well, maybe I need to try this. Maybe I need to try this. And sometimes it lands, but sometimes it doesn't, right? So it's okay, especially in this coming week, if you need to try a couple of different things or explore a couple of different avenues for you to think through what it is that you want and really be precise about how it is that you are approaching those things. Mercury is not going to make that easy for any of us, nor is Mars. So as you're encountering any kind of confusion about what it is that you want, again, the best thing you can do is to be patient with yourself and patient with the people around you, right? So, confusion of desire, difficulty articulating what it is that you're after, retreading back to... So sometimes when we talk about Mars as being goal-oriented or goal-driven or goal-directed. So maybe, too, what we might be encountering during this particular season is a revisiting of some old goals that we may have set for ourselves or some old ideals that we've set for ourselves. Are they still working for us, or do we need to course correct? Right? We'll be able to do some introspection after our carb coma on Thursday. But that comes with a caution because too much navel gazing is not usually a good thing. And it can lead to overthinking. And that's the last thing any of us need to be doing right now. Now is not the time for overthinking. Now is the time for being in the moment and enjoying the abundance that is right here before us in this present time. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so glad to share this journey with you. If you're interested in getting in touch with me for a consultation so that you and I can go one-on-one over your chart over the next year to look at what's coming up for you, especially with this Jupiter transit of Sagittarius, please take a look at my booking link down below in the description. You'll be able to select a time, determine which service is best for you, and pay online there. So I've made it really easy and convenient for anyone who's interested in getting some additional help. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear your feedback. Leave a comment down below and I will engage as much as I can. Thanks so much for being part of this journey. Be well.